Today there are 62 national parks spanning 29 states and 2 territories, along with an additional 128 national monuments protecting everything from fossil beds in Nebraska to the Statue of Liberty. The National Park Service, administering over 81,000 square miles of land and receiving some 318 million visitors annually, is integral to preserving the natural beauty of our country. However, the NPS is still a fairly new addition to the nation. The first national park, Yellowstone, would be created by Congress and approved by President Ulysses S. Grant on March 1, 1872, placing the region directly under the control of the Secretary of State. Created to protect the geysers, waterfalls, canyons, and bison of the area, not only was Yellowstone the first national park in the US, but it was also the first in the world, spurring the growth of park systems in America and abroad. The establishment of Yellowstone National Park would inspire conservationists like John Muir to push for parks to be established across the country. Because of efforts by Muir and others, the next to join Yellowstone as national parks were 2 Californian parks. First, Sequoia on September 25, 1890, and second, Yosemite 6 days later, the former of which hosts some of the world's tallest trees and the latter of which contains the vast Yosemite Valley. From 1890 to 1906, 3 more national parks would be established, including Mount Rainier outside of Seattle, protecting the 14,411-foot tall Mount Rainier, Crater Lake in Oregon, containing a lake created by a collapsed volcano, and Wind Cave in South Dakota, home to a vast network of caves along with prairies and pine forests above ground. On June 8, 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt would sign the Antiquities Act into law, thereby giving the president the ability to create federal land and national monuments, an act that has been used over 100 times since being signed into law. 3 months later, Roosevelt would designate Devil's Tower in Wyoming the first national monument in the country. Following the passage of the Antiquities Act, Mesa Verde National Park was formed in Colorado, created to protect the cave dwellings made by Pueblo Native Americans. Glacier along the Canadian border in Montana, Rocky Mountain along the Continental Divide in Colorado, Hawai'i Volcanoes, the first outside of the continental US in what was at the time a US territory, and finally Lassen Volcanic, containing the largest lava dome in the world in Northern California. The nation's 11 national parks and 24 national monuments were under the Department of the Interior and administered independently, meaning standards and practices at one park could be vastly different from another. In the case of Yellowstone, Congress would stop providing funding entirely in light of ineffective management. As a result, the U.S. Army would have to be called in and took control of Yellowstone on August 20, 1886, and were able to effectively stop poaching and other disallowed activities. This situation, however, was not ideal for both Americans visiting the park and the Army, causing the federal government to begin seeking a better solution to poor management of its parks. 16 days following the creation of Lassen Volcanic National Park on August 25, 1916, President Woodrow Wilson would sign the National Park Service Organic Act, creating the National Park Service to, quote, leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. An additional 8 national parks would be established under the new National Park Service over the next 17 years, including the first in Alaska, Denali National Park, home to the tallest peak in the US, Acadia in Maine, the easternmost park in the continental US, Grand Canyon, previously a national monument and today one of the top 10 most visited parks in the country, Zion, the first in Utah, Hot Springs in Arkansas, an area that has been federal land since 1832, making it the oldest area managed by the NPS, Bryce Canyon in Utah, Grand Teton just south of Yellowstone in Wyoming, and Carlsbad Caverns, a system of 117 caves in New Mexico. There would be 19 national parks across the country and several more national monuments by 1933, and, on June 11th of the same year, an additional 56 national monuments and military sites would be transferred from the U.S. Forest Service and War Department to the National Park Service, a major step for the NPS. Since 1933, an additional 42 parks have been created across the country, some of the most notable of which include Everglades National Park, established in May 1934, Contains nearly 8,000 square miles of southern Florida wetlands. Great Smoky Mountains, June 1934. Hosts 816 square miles of Appalachian Mountains and is the most visited park in the country with nearly 11.5 million visitors each year. Isle Royale, April 1940. Off the coast of Michigan's Upper Peninsula in Lake Superior. Mammoth Cave, July 1941. Home to the world's longest cave system at over 400 miles. Virgin Islands, August 1956. Preserving some 23 square miles of Caribbean coastline in one of 2 national parks outside of the 50 states today. Redwood, October 1968. Protecting nearly half of California's remaining redwood trees and the world's tallest tree, Hyperion, at 379 feet tall. Arches, November 1971. Containing over 2,000 of Utah's sandstone arches created over millions of years. Badlands, November 1978. Nearly 400 square miles of layered rock formations and prairies home to prairie dogs, bison, and bighorn sheep. Theodore Roosevelt, November 1978. Home to much of the land that Teddy Roosevelt hunted bison on and fell in love with as a young man, coming to inspire much of his conservationist platform as president. Channel Islands, March 1980. 5 islands off the coast of Southern California with half of the park's area being underwater. Gates of the Arctic, Glacier Bay, Katmai, Kenai Fjords, Kobuk Valley, Lake Clark, and Wrangell St. Elias, all created by the Alaskan National Interest Lands Conservation Act on December 2, 1980 in Alaska. American Samoa, October 1988. The second national park outside of the 50 states today, along with Virgin Islands National Park. Dry Tortugas, October 1992. Containing 7 islands in the Gulf of Mexico off the Florida coast, and the southernmost national park in the lower 48. Death Valley, October 31st, 1994. With both the lowest elevation in the US at 279 feet below sea level and a record high of 134 degrees. Gateway Arch, February 2018. Containing the iconic Gateway Arch in downtown St. Louis. Indiana Dunes, February 2019. Preserving 23 square miles of Lake Michigan lakeshore and sand dunes. And finally, the newest park in the country, White Sands National Park. Established as a national monument in 1933 and a national park on December 20th, 2019. Home to southern New Mexico's rare white sand dunes. Starting from humble beginnings with Yellowstone, the National Park Service is an iconic American institution. Today, it administers land in all 50 states and all 5 American territories, on top of DC, clocking in at over 132,000 square miles. Over 318 million Americans and foreigners visit National Park Service sites yearly. This is 435 American. Thanks for watching.